Over the years, I've covered virtually everything there is to talk about with Turo. I've talked about which cars you should buy, which ones you should avoid. I've broken down how to do pre-purchase inspections. But the one topic that I've actually never talked about is how to actually analyze a deal and how to decide whether or not a car is worth buying and worth adding to your fleet. And so that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. If there is one video for you to watch of mine in the next year, this one is going to be it. So let's get started. So let's just dive right into it because I have a lot to cover in this video. So at this point in time, I've been a Turo host since 2017. I've probably purchased over 24 different cars. I really have gained a lot of experience on which cars to buy and which ones to avoid. And as a result of all of this experience, I personally know which cars work and which ones don't. And so because of that, at this point in time, as we sit here today in 2022, I don't really do a ton of market research for each individual car that I buy because of the fact that I buy the same types of cars and I really already know how these cars will perform. I buy a lot of low-end economy cars, so things like Fords, Toyota, Mazdas. I recently purchased a Kia, and all of these cars perform in a very similar way. And so they've kind of become a no-brainer purchase. But whenever I purchased a new car, for example, like my Maserati Ghibli, which I purchased in August, which has since become totaled, I did do a lot of research to figure out, okay, how much should I buy this car for? How much can I rent this car for? And what does the ROI look like for this vehicle? So I guess really what I'm trying to say is that for you and your Turo fleet, you will eventually find your stride, you'll find your bread and butter, and when that happens, you won't have to do as much research for each individual car, as long as you stick to the same types of cars. But then whenever you start veering out from your normal vehicles and you start trying new things, that's whenever market research will be your best friend. With that being said though, whenever I'm looking at a car that I'm wanting to add to my fleet, the number one most important factor to me is the ROI. So how much and how long will it take for me to make all of the money back that I spent on this car? So for example, if a car costs me $5,000, I want to try to figure out, okay, how long is it going to take me to make $5,000 with this car? And because of the fact that I buy low-end economy cars, so most of the cars that I purchase are around that $5,000 mark, I try to reach this within about 6 months period of time. Granted, with the used car market exploding like it has recently, I have kind of increased that to 9 months for those more expensive cars that I buy. But in general, I'm looking for on average 6 months to make all of my money back on this investment. Now, the important thing to understand here is that ROI really isn't created equal amongst different vehicle brackets. And what I mean by that is if you have a low-end economy car, like the ones that I buy for $5,000, you're going to be able to get a much higher ROI on that car simply because of the fact that the cars are cheaper. But ROIs don't increase at an equal rate, meaning that if you buy a car that costs $50,000, having that same standard, that same expectation that you can make all of your money back within 6 months, it just simply isn't realistic, and you have to adjust these goals and these figures based off of the types of cars that you're buying. In my experience, I have found that for cars that are priced between $0 and $10,000, keeping that kind of 6-month ROI threshold is a really good place to start. But as I mentioned a few moments ago, sometimes you do have to increase that to about 9 months. What this means is that if you can make your money back on a car that costs anywhere between $0 and $10,000 within at least a 9-month period of time, then that car will typically be a good investment. So with this math in mind, if I was to buy a $5,000, for example, let's say Mazda 2, and I rented that car out on the Turo platform, well, that car isn't going to be rented out every single day of the month. Different markets have different utilizations, and depending on where you live will dictate how often your cars are rented out. For me, I've found that my average utilization is about 25 days per month. My cars are rented out the vast majority of the time. So with that math involved and with a $5,000 car, I would have to price this car at roughly between $35 and $40 per day in order to make my money back within 6 months. This is taken into account the fact that the car will not be rented out every single day. It's also taking into account that I have to pay Turo 25% of all of my earnings, given the fact that I'm on the 25% protection plan, which is the insurance package that I've chosen for my Turo fleet. This is the rough math that I'll typically use whenever I'm looking at low-end economy cars. But like I mentioned earlier, whenever you're looking at more expensive cars, it's a totally different ballgame with a totally different set of rules. Whenever you're looking at cars that, in my experience, are priced at above $15,000, that 6 to 9 month period of time to make back the ROI gets extended substantially, and it gets extended to closer to like 12 to 18 months, if not longer. Now let's take a look at some real world applicable examples. Now, one thing that I do want to note is that whenever we look at higher end cars, in this case, we're going to take a look at a Jeep Wrangler first. They typically do have lower utilization than lower end economy cars. I found this to be true with my Jeep Wrangler that I owned, with the Maserati I owned, with the Mercedes that I used to own a couple of years ago. It's been a pretty consistent thing that I have found time and time again. So while my low end economy cars maybe utilize 25 days per month, higher end cars only get utilized about 20 days per month. So we will be keeping this in mind whenever we go through the figures of these three real world examples that we're about to go through now. So let's first take a look at a Jeep. A Jeep is considered to be one of the most popular cars on Turo. And you can see here that I have placed a price filter here to only show me the cars that are priced between $25,000 and $50,000. And if we scroll through these cars that are available on Car Gurus, you can find them for between $30,000 and $50,000 depending on the mileage. But for the sake of this example, we're going to be keeping it in the range of between $30,000 and $40,000 because it is very realistic to find a solid Jeep for that price. For example, this one right here, this one right here, and there's also one right here as well. With this figure in mind of finding a Jeep Wrangler for between $30,000 and $40,000, you would have to make about $1,700 to $2,200 per month in order to achieve a 100% ROI within an 18-month period of time. With this monthly revenue figure in mind, you would have to pocket in your hands $85 to $110 per day. But then, of course, we can't forget Turo's cut, which is substantial, 25% in my case. So that means I would need to price these cars 25% higher than what I would want to make into my pocket. So in this case, the daily trip price for a Jeep Wrangler that I paid between $30,000 and $40,000 for would have to be priced at between $106 and $137.50. Turo doesn't allow cents. So $137 daily trip price in order for me to make the revenue figures that I would need in order to determine this car a good investment. So now begs the question of, can we achieve that? So we head on over to Carsync, which is one of my favorite Turo tools on the face of the planet, and I've already filtered out this search to only show me Jeep Wranglers. So all of the green dots on this map are Jeep Wranglers that are in my area. Now, if we look at this price per day distribution, you can see that the vast majority of Jeeps in my area are priced for between, in some cases, $51 to $60 per day. There's a lot priced between $61 and $70 per day. Another significant portion, $71 to $80 per day. And then we also have between $81 and $90 per day. For the sake of example, we'll say that the average daily trip price for a Jeep Wrangler is probably between $75 and $80 per day. If we look at the higher end of this price distribution chart, you can see that there are very few Jeeps that are priced for over $100 per day in my area. We have 4.1% priced between $101 and $110, 4.1% priced at between $111 and $120, and then the same could be said for Jeeps priced above $120 per day. We can really confirm this by looking at Turo in the Dallas area, and we can find that Turo really confirms the data that Carsync provides. Most cars are priced for between $70 to $80 per day, if not lower. Very few are priced at over $100 per day, and the ones that are priced higher are typically newer models like this 2021, this 2020, or this 2022. Now, if we compare the $75 to $80 per day daily trip price compared to the figures that we discussed earlier, we can conclude that a Jeep Wrangler is not a good investment if you're wanting to achieve a 100% ROI within about an 18-month period of time. I should note that if you can find a Jeep Wrangler for close to $30,000, then it could be worth buying because it's pretty close to that 18-month period of time that we look for. But if you get close to that $40,000 mark or above $40,000, then in my opinion, a Jeep just simply isn't worth it if you're looking at ROI alone. Next, let's take a look at Tesla Model 3s, which are arguably one of the most oversaturated cars on Turo. I have said in many videos that I don't recommend buying a Model 3 because I think there are too many of them. But for the sake of this car being so popular, we'll compare it in this video. So whenever you look at Tesla Model 3s, you can find them for between $40,000 and $50,000 pretty consistently. For example, this one right here, this one right here. We scroll down and there are more examples of these Tesla Model 3s in this price range. Next, we head on over to Carsync, and Carsync shows me how many Tesla Model 3s there are in my area. And to be honest, I was surprised that it looked as though there was a very similar amount of Tesla Model 3s as there were to Jeep Wranglers. So that did impress me in my market specifically. If we head on over to the price per day distribution chart, you can see that a lot of Model 3s are priced at about $91 to $100 per day. A lot are priced at between $81 and $90 per day. A decent amount between $71 and $80 per day, but there are very few that are priced at over $120 per day. I would say that the vast majority are between, $80 to $120 per day. And then we look at Turo and it really confirms that data. For example, this one for 100, this one for 89, this one for 123, 86, 109, 122. So it confirms the data that we just looked at. So with these figures in mind, if you were to buy a Tesla Model 3 for between $40,000 and $50,000, you would need to make between $2,200 and $28 per month on this car, and you would have to be able to make on a daily trip price in your pocket between $85 and $138 per day. But of course, we can't forget about Turo's slice of the pie, so you would have to price the car at between $106 and $173 per day. Now, keeping these Carsync figures in mind here, you could potentially justify the purchase of a Tesla Model 3 as long as you were to buy one that was as close to $40,000 as possible, because of the fact that there are daily trip price averages that fall within the proper range that we look for if we're looking for an 18-month ROI. Now, I still stand by the fact I think that Teslas are oversaturated. I personally wouldn't buy one, but from an ROI standpoint, they're actually not that bad. Lastly, I want to show you the math that I used for the Maserati Ghibli, which I purchased for $29,500. And with that math in mind, I would need to make about $1,638 per month in revenue from this car in order to achieve an 18-month ROI. With this in mind, I would need to make $82 per day from renting out this Maserati, and that means I would need to price it at $102 per day. Then we head on over here to Carsync, and you can see here that the price for the Maserati Ghibli is well above $100. In fact, there is only 7% of all of the Maseratis in my area that are priced between $90 and $100. The rest are all priced well above $100, some exceeding $150. So with this math in mind, and knowing that I would need to price the car at least $102 per day in order to achieve this ROI that I was looking for, the Maserati was deemed a really solid investment. And I did end up seeing this ROI calculations playing out in real time with the Maserati, and the calculations did add up really nicely. And I ended up making between $1,500 and $2,000 per month from the Maserati whenever it was rented out on Turo. Now, one other thing that I do want to note before we move on is the fact that this 100% ROI calculation that I put so much emphasis on, it's for the most part kind of an arbitrary thing. I just kind of made it up for myself because in my experience with Turo, if a car can't make 100% of its purchase price back within 18 months, I'm just not interested in it. But for you, maybe that figure is 18 months, maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 3 years. Regardless of what it is, it doesn't really matter, but you just need to figure out what ROI you're going to be shooting for, and then you use this math and this process to figure out which cars fit that ROI qualifications that you're wanting to meet. Now, I know that this equation and this math setup that I have going here leaves a lot out of the equation. I totally get that. But the thing is that this is just one part of the equation. This is the math portion, the ROI portion, and this is the portion of the equation that just tells me, okay, theoretically, could I make money with this car? But this is just one piece of the puzzle, and it's an important piece of the puzzle, but I would argue it probably isn't the most important piece. Now, the most important piece of the puzzle here, at least least in my opinion, isn't the ROI that you can get from a car. It's instead how the reliability of a car will be. That is really the first thing that I look at, and ROI is second. The reason is because you can have a car that is going to produce a killer ROI in theory, but if that car is constantly in a shop, if it's constantly having problems, if it is unreliable as heck, then that car is not going to do you any good, and you're never going to achieve that ROI that you've calculated in your head. Because of this, there are a lot of cars that could have really great ROIs, but because of their poor reliability and their poor track record, HP and I stay away like the plague. For example, Ford Fiestas. This is a car that I've talked about on this channel many times. A 2014 Ford Fiesta, for example, can be purchased for very easily around $4,000 to $5,000. In this car market, that is insane. But HP and I will not touch them with a 10-foot pole because of the fact that they have notorious transmission problems. And so even though these cars can absolutely make a killer ROI, we know that these cars are not worth our time because of the fact that issues are almost inevitable. Potential maintenance and potential problems that you could run into whenever you're running a Turo fleet, it's hard to calculate these things. You can calculate your basic maintenance and repairs, and these are things that we absolutely keep in mind. But you can't necessarily calculate the theoretical issues that you could run into in the future. For example, engine problems, transmission problems, suspension problems. All of these problems can be very costly, and they're really difficult to predict. And so because of that, whenever we look at a car, the very first thing that we look at is how is the reliability? What is the track record? What are other owners of these cars saying? And only once we've given this car a green light as far as mechanically, reliability, and maintenance-wise goes, that's whenever we dig into the actual math of the car. And that's whenever we really start digging into the ROI to see if this car is worth our time. Now, ROI, reliability, and maintenance are two of the key components that we look for, and I would say that these two things are really the deciding factors. But there are some other things that I definitely keep in the back of my mind as well. Number one is resale value. One of the goals that HP and I always have with every single car in our fleet is the idea of, okay, if we need to sell this car or if this car gets totaled, can we make more money off of the car when this happens than whenever we bought the car in the first place? Now, this really has to do with the purchase price of the car rather than the car itself. And that's whenever buying below market value is so incredibly important. Purchase price is going to be a really large dictating factor in your bottom line profit. If you have a car that is a great buy on the surface, but you overpay for that car, you leave yourself really exposed to losses if something was to happen to that car. So for us, we like to look at the KBB value of the car. We like to see what that car is selling for on third-party platforms, and we typically like to go below that price. Even if it's just a couple of $100s below, we really don't want to pay market value or above market value for a car because it simply isn't worth it, and it's going to leave you with a loss later on down the road. Now, unfortunately, I don't think that there's any sort of clear-cut equation that we can use to evaluate Turo deals. But I think that if you're somebody who's wanting to buy a car for Turo and you're not exactly sure how to determine whether or not this is a good investment, ask yourself a handful of questions. Does this car have a good maintenance track record? Is this car reliable? Does this car have any major issues that a number of different owners have reported? And if they have, has the manufacturer of that car addressed those problems? If yes, then maybe you could move forward. If no, then avoid that car like the plague. Then once you've answered all of those questions, then go into your notebook, your folder, your calculator, and determine whether or not you can make 100% of that purchase price back within either 6 months or 18 months, depending on the purchase price of the car. These factors and these questions will really help add clarity on whether or not a car is worth your investment. And honestly, by using this thought process, I have never purchased a bad car on Turo. Any car that has been a dud or a mistake in the past has always been one that I've deviated from the standard process. It's been one where a car had major issues that I simply ignored or justified. It's been one that I spent a little bit too much money on. By following these rules that I've outlined in this video, you will be setting yourself up for success every single time, and I feel 100% confident about that. But like always, you guys, I hope that you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, comments, if you have anything to add, I would love to hear it. So make sure to leave a comment down below. And while you guys are at it, make sure to hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the notification bell. And I will see you guys in the next video.